The first summer I remember being sent away, I was 7 years old and my mother packed my suitcase herself. She folded my shirts into perfect little squares, the way she never folded Daniel's, and she told me it was because Aunt Rosalind's house had better weather, and I would have so much fun. I believed her. I was 7. You believe whatever your mother tells you when she's kneeling in front of your open suitcase, smoothing your hair back from your face like she loves you more than anything in the world. It wasn't until the third summer that I understood the truth had a shape to it, and that shape was Daniel's standing in the driveway with a new fishing rod, waving at me through the rear windshield of my father's car as I was driven 2 hours north to my aunt's little house at the edge of a lake town nobody had ever heard of. Have fun with Aunt Rose, my father said, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. He always looked at the road when he said things like that. Why can't I come to the cabin? Because there's only so much room, sweetheart. And your brother gets carsick if there's too much stuff in the car. I was 9 years old the year he told me that. I did the math even then. A fishing rod, a cooler, 3 duffel bags for a family of 3, and somehow there was no room for me, a 90-pound child who took up considerably less space than a cooler. By the time I was 11 I stopped asking why. I had learned that the question itself embarrassed everyone, made my mother's mouth go thin and my father suddenly very interested in his phone. So every June like clockwork my suitcase got packed and I got driven north and Daniel got driven south to whatever lake or mountain or theme park my parents had picked that year. And this went on for 9 summers without interruption, without explanation that ever satisfied me, until the summer I turned 16 and everything I thought I understood about my family turned out to be built on top of a lie so large it had needed 9 years and hundreds of miles to keep it buried. My name is Wren. This is the story of how I found out why. Aunt Rosalind's house sat on a gravel road that turned to mud every spring, half a mile from a lake that never got warm enough to swim in comfortably until July. She wasn't my father's sister, she was my mother's, older by 6 years, unmarried, sharp-tongued, and the only adult I knew who talked to me like I was a full person instead of a smaller, dumber one. The first few summers I cried in the car on the way there. By the 4th or 5th I stopped crying and started counting days, the way you count days in a sentence you don't understand you're serving. Rosalind never asked me why I looked like that when I arrived, hollow-eyed and already homesick for a home that didn't seem to want me in it. She just handed me a glass of lemonade and put me to work weeding her garden, and somewhere around the second week I'd forget to be sad, because Rosalind had a way of making ordinary days feel like they mattered. She taught me to can tomatoes. She taught me to identify birds by their calls before I ever saw them. She let me stay up late reading with a flashlight and pretended not to notice the light under my door. She was, in every way that counted, more present in my childhood than my own parents were, and I loved her fiercely and resented that love a little too, because loving her felt like a consolation prize for a life I hadn't chosen. Why do they always send me here? I asked her once. I was 12, sunburned, sitting on her porch steps shelling peas into a bowl between us. Rosalind didn't look up from the peas. Because I asked them to, she said. I remember blinking at her. You asked them to send me away? I asked them to let me have you for the summers, she said, like there was a difference, like that distinction was supposed to comfort me. It's not the same thing, Wren. It feels the same. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer at all, and then she set the bowl down and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, something between guilt and fierce, aching tenderness. One day you'll understand, she said. And when you do, I need you to know that everything I did because I loved you. Not despite it. Because of it. I didn't understand. I wouldn't understand for 4 more years. But I never forgot the way she said it. Like a woman leaving herself a message she knew she'd need someone to find later. At home, in the months between summers, I watched my family from a small, cold distance that widened every year. Daniel was 2 years older than me, loud in the way boys are allowed to be loud, and my parents orbited him like he was the only son in the house. Every school project got taped to the refrigerator. Every soccer game got attended, photographed, narrated afterward over dinner in loving detail. My science fair ribbon, second place citywide, sat in a drawer because nobody thought to hang it up, and when I brought it up once my mother said, "Oh honey, that's wonderful," in the exact tone she used when she wasn't really listening. It wasn't that they were cruel to me. That would have been easier to name, easier to be angry about in a straight line. It was subtler than cruelty. It was 1,000 small omissions that added up to a life lived at the edge of my own family's attention, like I was a guest in a house I'd been born into. Daniel wasn't cruel either, for what it's worth. He didn't know any better. He'd never had to notice the gap because he'd never once landed on the wrong side of it. When we were young, he'd sometimes ask why I never came on vacations, and my mother would say something breezy about Aunt Rosalind needing company, and he'd shrug and go back to his cereal, because that answer made sense to a boy who had never once been asked to sacrifice anything. I used to lie awake some nights in my own bed in the weeks before June, and try to imagine what it would feel like to be wanted the way Daniel was wanted. Not loved. I don't think my parents ever stopped loving me, not really, but wanted. Chosen. I never landed on an answer. I just landed on July, every year in Rosalind's garden, learning the names of birds instead. The summer everything broke open. I was 16 and it started with a phone call in March, 3 months before the pattern was even supposed to begin. My mother answered it in the kitchen and I was doing homework at the table close enough to hear her voice change, go tight and low. The voice she used for bad news or for conversations she didn't want me overhearing, which by that point in my life I'd learned to recognize as often the same thing. When, she said. And then after a pause, is it, how bad exactly? I looked up. My mother's hand had gone to the counter, gripping the edge of it like the floor had tilted. Okay, she said. Hey, we'll come. We'll figure it out. She hung up and stood there for a long moment before she noticed I was watching her. Aunt Rosalind's sick, she said. The doctors think it's serious. I didn't process the word cancer until later that night, lying in bed, running the conversation back over and over, feeling something crack down the center of me that I didn't have language for yet. Rosalind, with her tomatoes and her bird calls and her flashlight under the door pretending. Rosalind was sick and my mother's voice had gone thin and afraid in a way I had genuinely never heard it go for me. That was the moment, if I'm honest, that the first real crack of doubt opened up in me. Not suspicion exactly. Just a question with no shape yet. Why does she sound like that? Like something is about to be lost that she can't survive losing. We went up in May, earlier than usual, all 4 of us together for the first time in as long as I could remember. My mother pale and quiet in the passenger seat, my father driving too fast, Daniel in the back beside me for once instead of me being the one shipped off alone. Rosalind looked smaller than I remembered. The cancer was in her pancreas, and by the time they'd found it, the doctors were no longer using words like treatment so much as words like comfort. She was 58. She had maybe 8 months. I sat with her every day that week while my parents made calls and cried in the car where they thought no one could see, and Daniel sat in front of the television looking shell-shocked in the specific way that people look when a tragedy finally lands somewhere close enough to touch them for the first time in their sheltered lives. It was the 4th night, late, everyone else asleep, when Rosalind asked me to help her into the porch chair, the same one where I'd shelled peas with her at 12 years old, and she looked at the lake in the dark like she was trying to memorize it and she said, I need to tell you something and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. My stomach dropped in the specific way it drops when your body knows before your mind does that the next few minutes are going to reorganize your entire life. Hey, I said. You asked me once why your parents always sent you to me, she said. Do you remember that? I remember. I told you that you'd understand one day and that everything I did out of love. She turned to look at me and her eyes were wet, and for the first time in my life, my strong, unshakable Aunt Rosalind looked afraid. The truth is, Wren, I'm not your aunt. I'm your mother. The lake made a small sound against the dock. Somewhere far off, a bird I could have named for her once upon a time called out into the dark. I didn't say anything because there was nothing in me yet that had organized itself into words. The woman you've called your mother your whole life is my younger sister, Carol, Rosalind went on, her voice steady now, like she'd rehearsed this 1,000 times in 1,000 versions of this exact night. I had you when I was 22. Your biological father wasn't in the picture. He left before you were born and I was alone and scared and Carol and her husband had just found out they couldn't have children of their own. Daniel, I said. My voice came out strange like it belonged to someone else. They adopted Daniel 2 years before you were born through an agency. A closed adoption, different birth parents, no connection to any of us. And then I got pregnant, unplanned, alone, and Carol came to me with an offer. She and Peter would raise you as their own. I would still be part of your life as your aunt. No one outside the 4 of us would ever know the truth. It was supposed to protect you. It was supposed to give you a stable home with 2 parents instead of one exhausted 22-year-old who was working 2 jobs and living in a basement apartment. So you gave me away. I let you go, she said, and her voice cracked open on the word let. There's a difference even if it doesn't feel like one. I couldn't give you the life they could give you. I told myself that every day for 16 years. But I couldn't stay away from you either. So I asked for summers. I asked Carol to let me have you for 2 months a year, so I wouldn't lose you completely, so I could watch you grow up even if I couldn't call myself your mother while I did it. I sat there in the dark and the pieces of my entire childhood began rearranging themselves in real time, the way a photograph develops. Slow and then all at once. Every summer wasn't a punishment. It wasn't proof that I mattered less than Daniel. It was the opposite of what I'd believed for 9 years. It was a woman fighting in the only way she was allowed to fight, to hold on to a piece of her daughter that the world had told her she wasn't allowed to keep. They told me it was so Daniel could have family vacations, I said. My voice sounded very far away to my own ears. That's what Mom always said. There wasn't room in the car. He got carsick. Rosalind closed her eyes. That's not true. That was never true. It was easier for them to say than the truth, I think. Easier than explaining to a 7-year-old or to Daniel or to anyone who might ask, why you spent every summer somewhere else. It was a lie that protected the bigger lie. I didn't know they were telling you that, Ren. I swear to you I didn't know. If I had. If you had what? The anger arrived late, the way anger sometimes does, after the shock has already worn a path for it to travel down. You'd have told them to stop? You'd have told me the truth sooner? You had 16 years, Rosalind. You had a decade of pea shelling and flashlights and bird calls, and you let me believe my own parents thought I was worth less than a fishing trip. I know, she said. I know. And I don't have an excuse that will make it hurt less. I only have the truth and I'm giving it to you now because I'm running out of time to give it to you at all. And because you deserve to know who you are before I'm not here to tell you. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I sat with the truth the way you sit with a bruise, pressing on it to see how deep it goes. In the morning I found my mother. Carol, I made myself think, though I couldn't yet make myself stop calling her mom out loud, sitting alone at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, one of them clearly poured for me before I'd even come downstairs, like she'd been waiting. She told you, Carol said. It wasn't a question. 9 years, I said. 9 years of sending me away and telling me it was because of Daniel's carsickness. 9 years of watching you hang his soccer photos on the fridge and put my science ribbon in a drawer. Did you ever think about what that would do to me? Believing that. Carol's eyes filled and for the first time in my life I watched my mother. This careful, composed woman who never let her face show more than she meant it to, completely lose the ability to hold herself together. I thought about it every single day, she said. Every summer I put you in that car, some part of me died a little because I knew what it looked like from where you were standing. But I couldn't tell you the truth, Ren. Not without telling you everything. That you weren't really mine, that Rosalind was your mother, that the whole shape of your life had been decided by adults before you were old enough to have a say in it. I told myself the lie about the car and the vacations because it was smaller than the real one. I thought a small lie that made you feel less important was somehow kinder than a big truth that would make you feel like you didn't belong anywhere at all. It didn't feel kinder, I said. It felt like you loved him more. I know how it felt, she said, and her voice broke completely now. But I need you to hear this and I need you to really hear it. I never loved Daniel more than you. I loved you differently because loving you came with guilt I didn't know how to carry, and grief for the fact that I could never be honest with you about where you came from, and fear, constant fear, that if I got too close I'd give something away. Every summer I sent you to Rosalind's, it wasn't because you mattered less. It was because I couldn't look at you for 2 straight months without falling apart, knowing what we'd built our whole family on top of. I wanted to hate her in that moment. Some small wounded part of me did hate her and still does a little even now. But another part of me, the part that had spent 16 years learning to read the smallest signals of who was allowed to matter in that house, understood with a clarity that felt almost unbearable, that everyone in this story had been telling small lies to survive a larger one, and that I had spent 9 years as the only person in the family who didn't know the rules of the game everyone else was quietly playing. Daniel found out 2 days later when he overheard Rosalind and Carol arguing in the kitchen about whether Peter, my father, though even that word had gone strange in my mouth, had ever wanted to tell us the truth sooner. He came and found me on the dock, sat down beside me without saying anything for a long time, and then said very quietly, "So you're not really my sister." "I don't know what I am anymore," I told him honestly. "You're still my sister," he said after a while. "That's not. That part doesn't change just because of where you came from. If anything, he stopped jaw working. If anything, I owe you an apology I didn't even know I owed you. All those years I never once thought about what it looked like from your side. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. That you liked it up here. That it was your choice. It wasn't, I said. But it also wasn't what I thought it was either. We sat there a long time, the two of us, watching the lake do nothing in particular, two kids who'd been raised as siblings under two very different kinds of lies. His, a closed adoption no one ever discussed because there was nothing painful attached to discussing it. Mine, an open secret hidden behind a story about a fishing rod and a full car, engineered by people who loved me enough to keep me close and not enough for 9 years, to tell me the truth about why. Rosalind died in November, 7 months after that porch conversation, with me holding one of her hands and Carol holding the other, the three of us finally, for the first time, occupying the same room as exactly who we were to each other without a single lie left standing between us. I won't pretend the ending was clean. Grief doesn't organize itself for narrative convenience, and neither does betrayal, and I carried both of them tangled together for a long time after that November. Grief for the mother I'd only gotten to claim out loud for 7 months, and something more complicated than anger toward the mother who'd raised me and never told me why. But here's the thing about the truth, even a truth this late and this heavy. Once I had it, I could finally see my whole childhood clearly, and clarity, even painful clarity, is its own kind of relief. Every summer I'd spent believing I was the family's inconvenience had actually been 9 years of a woman fighting the only way she was legally and socially allowed to fight to stay in her daughter's life. Every fishing trip Daniel took without me hadn't been proof I mattered less. It had been the cost of a secret 2 women had built to protect me from a world that, in the year I was born, would have looked at a single 22-year-old mother and made my life harder in 100 ways neither of them wanted for me. It doesn't erase the years I spent as a child, packing my own suitcase eventually because I'd stopped waiting for anyone to want to do it for me, crying less each summer not because it hurt less but because I'd trained myself not to expect anything different. It doesn't erase the second-place ribbon in a drawer, or the particular loneliness of loving a family that seemed to love you a half step less than it loved the boy across the table. But I understand it now the way Rosalind promised I one day would. And more than that, I understand her. 22 years old, alone, handing her daughter to her sister and asking only for summers in return, spending 9 years teaching that daughter to shell peas and read bird calls and stay up late with a flashlight, building an entire relationship out of borrowed time because it was the only time she was allowed. I go back to that lake house every June now. It's mine, she left it to me, along with a letter I've read so many times the creases have gone soft, in which she apologized once more for the lie, and then wrote, I know I can't undo the years you spent believing you weren't wanted. I can only tell you the truth of it now. You were wanted so much that I broke my own heart every September handing you back. I hope one day that's enough. I hope one day it outweighs the silence. It doesn't outweigh it, not entirely. I don't think grief and gratitude ever fully cancel each other out. I think you just learn to carry both side by side, the way you'd carry 2 suitcases packed by 2 different people who both, in their broken, complicated human ways, loved you as much as they knew how. Daniel and I are closer now than we ever were as children. Closer, I think, than we would have been if the truth had never come out, because there's nothing left unspoken between us anymore, no silent architecture of favoritism holding up a lie neither of us understood we were living inside. He visits the lake house with me sometimes in the summer. We sit on the porch where I used to shell peas, and sometimes I teach him the names of birds the way Rosalind taught me, and I think in my own way I'm still keeping her promise. That one day I would understand. That one day it would be enough. It isn't enough. But it's something. And after 9 summers of believing I was the family's inconvenience, something finally is more than I ever thought I'd get.